This is not about Elon Musk. This is not a bandwagon of the far right. This is about the victims and ensuring swift and brutal justice is delivered to those demons responsible. It is about distinguishing between right and...
Rupert Lowe slammed delusional Labour MPs over their total failure to address the rape gang scandal.
A government official, if they're from the police, if they're from the judiciary, I don't care. Everybody should be treated equally under the law. They should all have the full force of the law brought down on their heads.
Nobody will escape justice, and Rupert Lowe is making that crystal clear for any tone-deaf people like Starmer.
And that's why the reform name is such a powerful name. If you listen in Parliament to how many times the word reform is mentioned, not in terms of the party, just reform this, reform that, reform the other. Why? Because Britain needs reforming.
After this massive betrayal, the public is running towards reform and Labour is terrified.
The British people want answers, so I'm going to ask questions of the Labour Party and several of them. Will the government commit to urgently deporting all guilty foreign nationals involved, including family members who were aware of the crimes and therefore complicit? Wives, sisters, mothers, cousins, if they knew and said nothing, these individuals are just as guilty as the rapists themselves.
The entire nation is in outrage, and Rupert Lowe came in swinging at Labour's utter incompetence.
Race or religion must protect nobody. Will the government commit to pausing all Pakistani visas and foreign aid into the country until the Pakistani government agrees to accept any of its deported citizens that have perpetrated these crimes on British soil, and also imprisons these rapists and their accomplices in Pakistan?
Rupert isn't beating around the bush like Starmer and his cronies. He's getting straight to the root of this scandal.
Will the government undertake a full investigation into officials who had knowledge of these crimes yet failed to act? Establish a specified task force to root out this wicked evil. Don't just fire these vile individuals, prosecute them.
Those disgusting people who let this disgraceful betrayal of justice continue must be caught and punished by the law.
Is there a tally for the overall number of rapes? Horrifyingly, it may well be in the millions. We just don't know. How many vulnerable young girls are estimated to still be involved in these gangs? If there is no estimate figure, why not? Will a regular update be published detailing ongoing prosecutions and sentencing?
These evil governments have been lying to us from the start, and the situation is much worse than you can imagine.
How many known foreign rapists per town, per region? Will they publish a breakdown of the immigration status of those involved? On what grounds were they in the UK? Do they have previous convictions? How many foreign nationals found guilty have been released but not deported? And how many re-offences... I'm going to carry on if that's right. How many re-offences have occurred since release? How many of these monsters are walking on the same streets as the girls they raped and abused?
Is Labour willing to do what it takes to punish these monsters, or is Starmer trying to protect the criminals?
A victim had come face to face with her rapist in the supermarket. Is the government comfortable with that? How many of the foreign rapists were in receipt of any form of state benefit? I'm going to carry on if that's right. How many released currently receive any state benefit? How many children have been born following a rape from these men? How many have been given access to the child against the mother's wishes? And how many have used the child as a route to remain in the UK?
The damage that this scandal has done to the young victims might never heal, and Rupert Lowe has had enough.
How many deportations have been blocked due to the rapist's right to a family life or other ECHR influences? Will the government set up a dedicated, confidential and accessible official process for whistleblowers to safely raise their concerns regarding foreign rape gangs, ensuring it is safe, secure and easy to find?
We need to get rid of whatever laws there are that protect these heinous criminals and deport them immediately.
The mass rape of young white working class girls by gangs of Pakistani rapists is a rotting stain on our nation. This is not about Elon Musk. This is not a bandwagon of the far right. This is about the victims and ensuring swift and brutal justice is delivered to those demons responsible. It is about distinguishing between right and wrong.
This is the biggest and most disgusting scandal in British history, and a complete disgrace on our leaders who have been unable to ensure proper justice. Rupert Lowe is speaking what is already on the tongues of millions of British people, and the country is united on this matter. There's an obvious solution to this matter, and the government's unwillingness to take the right steps shows that there is something deeper, much more sinister going on behind the scenes. What is Starmer hiding, and what is Labour so afraid of?
Matt Goodwin. Now, this is the scandal that has been dominating social media over the last few days. I'm, of course, talking about the grooming gang scandal, or as I call it, the rape gang scandal. As I discussed yesterday with former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, looking at the latest revelations to come from places like Oxford, we now need a national inquiry about this crisis.
Call this scandal what it is instead of mincing words. On top of that, it should be clear that this scandal is nothing new. These disgusting criminals have been running around doing whatever they want for decades now. Of course, that means our politicians, police and justice system allowed it to continue for all that time. Labour's true colours were there all along, as many of their MPs were saying disgusting things online during this. That qualifies as one of the biggest betrayal of the British public that this nation has ever seen.
Is why haven't more heads rolled? Why haven't more people in the establishment been held responsible for this horrific scandal? As GB News' very own Charlie Peters has pointed out, no police officer or government employee has ever been imprisoned for their gross misconduct in dealing with the grooming gang's horror. The grim reality is that for too many people in positions of power, they have ignored this scandal for too long, and they have avoided telling people the truth.
How is it that despite allowing this to continue for decades, practically no official has been held accountable yet? Jess Phillips keeps talking about justice, but now she's just running around terrified and protecting her boss, Starmer. It's not just Labour either. According to Rupert Lowe, the Conservatives shoulder as much blame as Starmer and his gang does, and he's not wrong. Every day, more details come out, and the situation gets more appalling, which is why a public inquiry is not a suggestion anymore, it's a demand.
Who could forget the time that Labour MP Naz Shah liked and retweeted a Twitter post that said, "Those abused girls in Rotherham and elsewhere just need to shut their mouths for the good of diversity," before later claiming it was an accident. And who could forget how the few brave people, courageous people who have dared to speak the truth about this scandal, who have spoken up on behalf of those children, have often then been vilified as an assortment of Islamophobes or far-right agitators.
At this point, it's clear what Labour values more. It's diversity and their idiotic myth of multiculturalism. That's their #1 priority, and not the British public. Their evil agenda is getting clearer by the day, and the fact that their MP was publicly tweeting stuff like that is both shameful and pathetic. What's worse is that she has faced no accountability for her words yet. Starmer and his cronies have turned Britain and justice into a joke, and it's about time that people wake up.
Jess Phillips is normally an outspoken feminist. She talks endlessly about protecting women and girls from misogyny and abuse. But when it comes to the issue of the grooming gangs, when it comes to defending women and girls from predominantly Muslim Pakistani gangs, she seems to be completely silent. She has also rejected Oldham Council's request for a national inquiry, claiming it is for Oldham Council alone to decide.
Jess Phillips is perhaps the biggest hypocrite in this scandal. For years, she has been an advocate for women's rights and justice, but now, all of a sudden, she is taking a completely different approach to everything. Countless girls were put through the most traumatizing experience of their lives, and Jess Phillips is refusing to hold an inquiry over it. Is she afraid that Starmer's name might pop up one too many times if an investigation happens? Rupert Lowe is clear on what Britain needs right now, and it's much simpler than you'd expect. It's basically common sense.
What we need in this country is a national inquiry to name and shame the complicit public officials in councils, the police, and the legal system. And we need to start deporting all those foreign nationals who have dual citizenship, removing them from the country.
Accountability is the only thing that can fix the state of this country. Each and every single one of those officials who were enabling this heinous behavior need to be identified and tried in our courts. They're just as guilty for these crimes as the actual criminals because they did nothing to stop them. Diversity is worthless if our people can't feel safe and secure in our streets.
This alerted my attention to the fact that this is another example of government which is not transparent, of issues that have not been transparently brought to the fore, which involves vulnerable young white women And it is, I think, also it involves power. It involves, the block voting. As you quite rightly said in your introduction, it involves a lot of Labour.
Our governments have been lying to us. They've been hiding the details on so many matters that it is shocking when these things get exposed. Take, for example, the immigration numbers. They're so incredibly high, and we're spending so much on illegal immigrants that it's ludicrous. Yet, this was hidden from us because the government is scared of the British public. It might be exactly why Starmer is trying to run away from the public inquiry as well.
Any family members who've been involved in this knowingly should be deported if they're foreign, if they're British, if they are a government official, if they're from the police, if they're from the judiciary, I don't care. Everybody should be treated equally under the law. They should all have the full force of the law brought down on their heads.
Great, Rupert, thank you.
Matt, this is a disgraceful example of right and wrong.
Yeah.
There's no grey in this. This is black or white.
How hard is that to understand for Starmer and his cronies? Justice should not be selectively applied, and this is a prime example of a two-tier justice system from two-tier care. This matter isn't even complicated for them to be hesitating this much. All they have to do is investigate properly, catch everyone who was involved, and deport them or punish them appropriately. However, sadly, our justice system isn't much better either. Even if these monsters are caught, they escape from justice, and a recent case shows just how broken our systems are.
We spoke about a guy called Curry Rauf. He was a sort of religious studies teacher, cab driver, father of 5, and grooming gang leader. He was part of a gang of 9 that raped, tortured and sexually abused 47 girls, some as young as 13.
These are the worst of the worst people imaginable. You'd assume that such monsters would have been caught and punished in the harshest ways possible by the law, but the reality is far more disappointing. Ask yourself, how on earth did we allow people like these into our countries? What's more concerning is that we let them stay for this long. In fact, some of these criminals are roaming the streets currently.
This monstrous group was sentenced to a total of between 4 and 19 years in jail. So this was back, I believe, in about 2012, something like that. Within 5 years, only 2 of them were still in prison.
It's baffling that these people did not get a life sentence in prison, but what's more pathetic is that they were let out within 5 years of their punishment. Guess what happens once they're back on the streets? Make no mistake, the safety of our girls has been compromised and there's nothing being done about it at the moment. Rupert Lowe and the Reform Party are offering a hopeful future, and Starmer is trying everything he can to sabotage them. As for the leaders of those gangs, they are using huge loopholes in the system to stay in Britain.
Now, both Rauf and Adil Khan were stripped of their British citizenship, but immediately renounced their Pakistani citizenship, and so were allowed to stay in Britain because they couldn't be left stateless, apparently. Now, Khan's case. Now, these guys, right, listen to this. They've been through, before 12 judges, 3 Crown Courts, immigration tribunals, and the Court of Appeal. Their long-running courtroom dramas alone have cost British taxpayers in legal aid £550,000.
By some miracle, the courts were sane enough to give the obvious verdict. These animals were found guilty and were in the process of being deported back to their home country. The loophole that they abused was so stupid and ludicrous that the whole thing sounds like a bad joke, but instead it's a horror movie. Why should we care if a bunch of heinous criminals are left stateless? In fact, we should be the ones renouncing them and forcefully sending them back. Of course, it gets much worse if you look at the details of their case.
After he told a tribunal, you're going to like this, the judge swallowed this whole. A, he was innocent. Well, no, he'd just been in prison. He was found guilty by a British court. B, had not, this is my favourite, and I'm quoting, had not committed, and I quote, that big a crime. And C, he wanted to be a role model for his son and teach him right from wrong. On that basis, this monster was allowed to stay in this country. British justice, what a disgrace.
Not even a toddler can come up with worse excuses than that, and the fact that the judge just accepted them shows how broken our system is. The irony of these people claiming to be role models for their children while carrying out the worst possible actions known to mankind is concerning. The simple truth is that these people are not compatible with British values, and the fact that they think their crimes were not that big of a deal should be telling enough.
I'm not going to mince my words here. These disgusting bastards are walking the streets of Rochdale, where they terrorise so many local girls. And these local girls, these underage, vulnerable girls, often bump into them. One girl bumped into Khan in Asda in 2020. She said, "I've never been so scared in all my life."
The biggest mistake we made was to mince our words. Holding back because of the fear of being called racist or any number of things is the reason this scandal is still going on. We can't just pretend that this doesn't exist and hope for it to go away. Just try and imagine the horror for those girls who had to see these criminals walk free. Apparently, it's okay to ruin someone's life in Britain as long as you are one of the government's favourite minorities.
Absolutely automatic. We need to get tough on deporting people who come to our country and then break the law. We need to get really tough like other sensible countries do. And if the law doesn't allow us to do that, then let's change the law. And if international laws don't allow us to do that, then let's derogate from those international laws.
It's really now or never. If the government does not get their act right and start being harsh on these criminals, then there's not much hope left for the future. What kind of message are we sending to the criminal gangs when we let them avoid responsibility for so long? Labour keeps using international laws as an excuse, but the people have had enough. There is nothing forcing us to adhere to those international laws, and British interests should always come first. There's a deeper reason behind this madness, and Starmer's failing to get it under control. Rupert Lowe is concerned just like the rest of us, but he has some very clear solutions.
Do you think Sir Keir Starmer understands the problem of immigration in this country, and is he the man to sort out?
Well, you have to remember he's a human rights lawyer, and it's a bit like, putting a fox in the chicken coop. I honestly don't think he is the man to be sorting this out. You've probably been seeing that we've been asking questions regularly, and we've been trying to get the information, the true information for the British public.
Starmer and his government are miserably failing to get the immigration issue under control. How does this relate to this issue? Majority of these criminal gangs are migrants from other countries, especially Pakistan. The very clear fact that Starmer is so lenient on them is because of his idiotic socialist bent. His agenda of multiculturalism is compromising the country, and Starmer can no longer be trusted with solving this issue.
Clear to the government that their job is to disclose the honest figures so the British people can make their own minds up about immigration. And you have to remember, it's not just illegal immigration, it's also legal immigration that we have to watch out for.
This is precisely why Starmer and his cronies are fuming over Reform UK. Starmer is so insecure that being called out over his lack of transparency makes him have a whole mental breakdown, which is why he and Labour have been doing everything they can to sabotage reform. Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage have been asking for the bare minimum, and that's just simple honesty. How pathetic is it that Starmer, the self-proclaimed man of integrity, can't even do that much?
There isn't enough integration, there's too much immigration. And, like anybody with any common sense, there has to be some structure which encourages people who want to do well here and come and live by our laws, but there has to also be safeguards to make sure we don't end up importing men of fighting age whose intentions we don't know.
Yeah.
So I think Nigel's right. I don't care about people's religion or their colour or whatever. If they come here and they want to make a contribution and they're here on merit, I like merit. Merit is the key.
We're mass importing these people and letting them stay in our country without safeguarding our values at all. They're not integrating into the British system, they're trying to start their own separate systems, and that is why we're seeing so many Sharia courts pop up in our country. There's no background checks on these people, and we have no idea what potential criminals we might be importing, and it's common sense to screen them beforehand. Despite what Starmer and his cronies try to smear them as, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage are not against immigration, they're against uncontrolled immigration.
Well, I think we should have a zero-tolerance approach to it. And as I say, if people are going to behave like that, Winston, they shouldn't stay here.
What if they've been here 3 generations or 2 generations?
It doesn't matter. They can't behave like that. And I think we've got to have some balance between the way in which we treat people in this country who are British, who've got genuine concerns about what's happening to their country, and people who've come here. And as you know, that a lot of these communities now want Sharia law. They want all sorts.
We've got at least 85 Sharia courts, I believe, in Britain.
I know. Well, I don't think that's right. You know, if you come here, you live by our laws. That's got to be a precondition of coming here. And you know, we don't make that a precondition, in my view, enough. So, you know, I don't have all the answers, but I think what we have to do is, like all these things, you have to start with the issue that's soluble, which is the illegal immigration. It's very straightforward. We have to deal with that. We have to stop.
At the end of the day, Rupert is right that we cannot compromise our laws. If they don't abide by them, they can simply leave. It's about time that the British public should be treated as the priority by our governments. The Tories failed us, and Labour is just too incompetent to do anything differently. That leaves reform, and they're gaining rapid support.
So what happens is the sensible Tories, as time elapses, will come over to reform, and then you have a clean vehicle from outside the existing establishment, which can hopefully reform the country. And that's why the reform name is such a powerful name. If you listen in Parliament to how many times the word reform is mentioned, not in terms of the party, just reform this, reform that, reform the other. Why? Because Britain needs reforming.
Every sane person in this country that felt betrayed by both Labour and the Conservatives is moving towards Reform UK now. Rupert Lowe destroyed Labour's idiotic excuses for covering up this tragedy. Their inaction is only contributing to making these gangs braver. Britain needs reforming, that is undeniable, and that's a vision that you can support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.